Please feel free to pause this video so you can write down the materials needed in this episode. Welcome back to Zinksterling. Today we're going to be looking at how to make a style of chain called loop and loop. The idea behind this is that you use loops of wire that are bent into clover shapes. You can do 3 lobes, 4 lobes, 2 lobes, 5, 6, I've seen up to 8, 9 lobe chains to make many different styles of chains, but are all pretty much constructed the same way. The required supplies for this chain making is very minimal. All you need is wire, a jig, and some sort of spike used to open up the loops whenever we get into the actual construction of it. So my spike is a roll pin punch that I sharpened. The wire that I'm using is 0.8 millimeters or 20 gauge. And the jig that I'm using is 8 nails hammered into a board around circles so that they're evenly spaced, or as close to evenly spaced as possible, to create pretty much a plus sign shape of link. The widest point is 5/8 across, and the narrower points are 3/8 of an inch across. You'll see here that I'm just bending the wire around the nails to create the shape of links that I need in order to assemble this chain. Really all you need is wire, a jig to make your links, and some solder, and that's pretty much all you need for this entire project. There's not a whole lot to it. It's just very time intensive, and however it is very rewarding in the end to create something completely from scratch. Now that I have my stack of links shaped, I'm just clipping them apart. You could use flush cutters if you were really worried about getting a perfect seam on them, but honestly it's such thin wire that you're gonna get a good solder flow for the most part anyways. And then here I'm just gonna add some flux to all my links, and then I'll start soldering them up one by one, and then after that it's onto an acid dip. Now that I have all my links made up, I'm just gonna put them on a bale of wire, heat them up some. We're not getting to annealing temperatures here, we're just trying to get enough heat in the links to get them to react with the acid dip a little better to clean them off. You could use pickle, do it a little slower, faster, depending on what chemicals you use. This is a 4% sulfuric acid and water mixture. Now that my links are all cleaned up and good to go, we'll go back to the bench and we'll start taking them off. And we're just going to set up the very first part of this chain. The very first part is the hardest to get just right, feeding the first links into each other, because there's just not a lot to hold on to. Once you start to get some length to it, it's pretty easy. So what I'll do is I'll take the very first link and I'll take my dapping block and just dome it over. You don't have to do this, it just makes it a little bit easier because the shape makes it easier to feed the next link into it. So I'll dome it over, make a nice little dome, force all my inside points together, and then I'm going to bind the inside crossways so that the 4 points that are closest together in the middle will become the very end of my chain. Now that I have the 4 inside points bound together, which I'm sorry that it kind of goes on and off screen, I was just trying to get it close enough so that I could see a little better. I'm going to take my spike and I'm going to start opening the loops up. What you want to do is make sure when you open your loops up that you open them to the same point on your spike every time. You can try to mark your spike with a Sharpie. I do it first, and actually my first mark was a little too big and it was causing my links to break, so I had to do a mark at a smaller diameter. The goal is really just to get it big enough that you can get the next link through the loop. Now that I have my 4 lobes opened up to the same diameter, I'm just straightening them up with a pair of pliers, and then I'm going to take my next link and I'll just force all the points, the inside points together on all my links by pinching them and pushing together. I'll do that with all of my links one by one, and then I can start to assemble this chain. Right there you saw I threw a link to the side. That was just I didn't get a good solder on it. That happens here and there, and when you start to assemble the chain, some of your links are going to come apart. Not always at your solder joint, but sometimes the wire just breaks, whether you're forcing too much pressure on them or what. So here's where you actually see the assembly of the chain. What you do is you take the 4 open loops that you use your spike to spread open, and you're going to feed the smaller loops back into them from the top down. Then once you get all 4 of those points fed into the opening, the open points, you're going to start to spread the new narrow points that you've put through open wider so that they catch and they can't come back apart. And then your next link is going to feed into those. If you just watch, you'll see what I'm talking about. Here you see that I've opened the 4 points up so that they can't come back through the original openings, and then I'm just going to spread them out all the way up to as close to that mark as possible so that my next link will fit easily into those loops. I had to remark my mandrel there, and that's why it skipped for a second. And then I'll bend my points up so that the next loops fit in, and we just start to feed the next one in. And you just go round and round, and that's how the chain's made. The next part of this video is just mostly a sequence of me doing the same process over and over so you can get an idea of how the chain is actually put together. Overall, I used 130 links and it came out to 42 grams of silver. You can see that one, the solder joint broke, so I just used my pliers to pull it out. The overall length after I drew it down, which you'll see toward the end of this video, was 23 inches without a catch or a clasp of any sort. And actually I broke another link there. Right when I was filming the links that I was putting together, I was breaking them over and over, and then as soon as I stopped filming I went like 87 links without having a single one break. It's just one of those things sometimes. So this style of chain making, some people... I've been requested to make like Bali chain, Foxtail chain, dragon bone chain, which I think is the type that's commonly used in Bali chains. As far as I can tell, Bali chain's just referring to chains that are made in Bali. It's not necessarily a specific type of chain. There are some common ones. One of them is a Byzantine chain that they actually file off into a square shape or into a cylinder after they put it together. As far as I can tell, it's just chains that are made in Bali. It's not necessarily a specific type. One of the most common ones is a dragon bone loop and loop style chain, which is just an oval version of this chain. I believe it uses 6 lobes instead of 4. I'd have to check on that just to be sure, but I'm pretty sure that's what I remember reading whenever I was looking it up. This chain can be made out of just about any diameter of wire. You can go bigger, you can go smaller. I find that for the size of jig that I have, 0.8 millimeter is about the perfect size wire to make a good heavy chain out of this. There's another broken one. Like I said, once I stopped filming the actual assembly, I quit breaking links, so I guess I was just trying to get too fast at it and I was putting too much pressure on these links. But yeah, I really hope you enjoy this video. For the most part, it's just going to be assembly, and then we'll get into drawing down into smaller diameters to stretch it and even out all your links, and then just clean up and polish work. Thank you. Please make sure to like and subscribe if you like this video. Share it with your friends if you know someone who's been trying to make a chain like this and maybe they just haven't found a video that explains it, and if you think this will help them out. Thank you. So now that I've added the last links, I ended up with 18 inches of chain, or right at 17 and a half. And then, sorry, I was using my cell phone to film this part. Now I'm pulling it through a 6.5 millimeter hole drilled into a board. This is going to stretch it out and even out the links. Then I'm doing a 6.25, and then I go down to a 5.75, and that's the final one I pull it through. And that ended up with 23 inches of chain. After that, I went through a quick annealing cycle, which I did off camera. Then here, I'm just pulling the chain over a 1.5 inch wooden dowel, and this is gonna force the chain to bend back and forth, which is gonna give it its ability to actually spiral in the end. If you skip this step, you end up with a chain that looks very rigid, and it doesn't really want to bend or flow quite right. I think I spent about 8 or 9 minutes. This is just the sped up version of it, but it was about 8 or 9 minutes of just working the chain over a piece of wood. This doesn't hurt your links or anything. And if you do have a broken link that's in the middle of the chain, it's incredibly hard to solder accurately and not attach two links together. So if that happens, I would highly recommend using a laser welder, or if you don't have one, asking somebody else if they can do it for you, because trying to flow solder on those little tiny joints when they're so close together, you run a really big risk of just soldering several links together. But that's why I used hard solder for all of the initial solders. That way if I did have to repair, I could use easy and hopefully avoid binding links together. Luckily, I didn't end up breaking any links. Here I'm just turning it black with some liver of sulfur. Give it a nice, if the inside of the links are black and then you polish the outside, it really gives a good contrasting look to it. And I just think it looks better in the end. Then after this, I will rinse it off, clean up the liver of sulfur, and then hit it with some 4/0 steel wool to just knock the liver of sulfur off the outside. I'll wash it, polish it, wash it again, and that's just about the end of it. So I really hope you enjoy this video. Please feel free to stick around to the end and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you. Tip of advice: if you're going to polish chain on a polishing arbor like this, always hold it with two hands and try to keep it as perpendicular, as vertical up and down on your wheel as possible. If you start spinning it sideways and one of those wheels catches, it will throw that chain. The best case scenario, it just does a little damage to your chain and you're perfectly fine. Worst case scenario, it whips it in a full circle and sends it back flying your way. And 42 grams of silver does not feel good coming at a high speed back toward your face. So highly recommend two hands, keep positive control, and if you can, use a pin polisher or tumble it with stainless steel shot, something like that. But this is just what I have to polish, so this is what I used. And here's the chain after the final cleanup. There's a bracelet I made using the same chain, just I pulled it a little bit smaller and I added a little bead to it. I came out with 24 inches of chain, like I said. The bracelet was 8 inches and took 10 feet of wire, and the 24-inch piece took, I think, right at 50 feet of wire. So, thank you.